So now we're going to turn it over for panel number 2 to my good friend Jesus Ortiz, who's joining us from Houston. Jesus is the founding editor of ouresquina.com, which is the country's leading Latino sports media company. And Jesus is going to lead a panel on the topic of Latino activism in sports. And he has some terrific panelists that he will introduce here. Take it away, Jesus.
Well, thank you very much for this great opportunity to have a wonderful discussion. And I don't know where to start. Let's start with A for Adrian Burgos, legendary professor of history at the University of Illinois and one of the leading experts on baseball. And I must say, he and I share the wonderful distinction of being the only two Latinos on the Baseball Hall of Fame's Historical Overview Committee, which got a lot of attention this week because we will, in 2027, we will decide whether Pete Rose is going to make the ballot. So that'll be pretty cool. Sara Toussaint, a leading marketing executive, formerly of Wells Fargo, but now partner North Carolina Courage, partner in an agency, trailblazer in many fronts, and one of the people I respect the most in terms of identifying what the Latino market wants and delivering it, and also promoting Latinas in sports and Latinos in sports overall. And then we have Janelly Farias, who played for Chivas Femenil, which is my parents' favorite soccer organization, Chivas de Guadalajara, from Santa Ana, California, a trailblazer. Not only is she a great soccer player, retired now, but as far as coming out and advocating for gay athletes, for Latinas, the leader. I firmly believe what she's done saves lives, because in our very homophobic Latino community, we need people like Janelly to speak out and to make a difference. So I'm so grateful that we have these brilliant Latinos speaking on this panel. Andrew, longtime friend, I'm so grateful for this opportunity to moderate this panel. And I tell you, I was thinking of the great song, Miss Robinson, and it says, "Where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio? Our nation turns a lonely eye to you." And I will ask, where have you gone, Roberto Clemente? Our gente turn its lonely eyes to you. Where is the next Roberto Clemente when we need him at a time like now, where we need a Roberto Clemente? And Janelly, I'm going to start with you because in many, not to put too much pressure on you, but in many ways, for Mexican Americans, for El Tri Mexican women's national team players, you are like a Roberto Clemente because you've spoken on an issue that not many Latinas, whether in soccer or anywhere, are willing to speak about, advocating for the gay community. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your struggle. I've read your bio. You tear up your knee. You're in your first relationship, and before the 20 one of the World Cups, you under 20 World Cup, and you're dealing with so many things. Can you tell the people your story of perseverance?
Yeah, Andrew, Jesus, thank you for this opportunity. I mean, it's an honor for me to be here with such an important people in the industry and just in our society that needs voices like this. So thank you for considering me. For me, it's an honor just, for knowing that, what I'm doing is important and it's relevant. I'll keep my story short because we're going to be here all day. I just retired from professional soccer. The last 7 years I've been playing in Mexico. I'm a Mexican American female out soccer player. And like you said, right, the Latin culture is very machista, very sexista, very homophobic. We are, in Mexico, right, still a third world country where women are seen as second and third class citizens. That's the reality that we live in. I've had the privilege of being born in America, being born in California. So I think I've been raised with a slightly different perspective. So I've gotten the best and the worst, I think, of both the American and the Mexican culture. And somewhere along the way, I realized that as a professional athlete, I had a voice and I have a voice. And that's something that's very hard to accept. To take that responsibility is very hard. Why? Because um, of this idea of intersectionality, where I am a female, I am a lesbian, I am Mexican, so many different things that where that make it even harder to speak up. But I've also realized that I have a privilege. I am a cisgender woman, white woman, and I realize that I can make a difference. I can be the voice of many people that think that they don't have a voice. So that's the way I've chosen to see my platform and my talent as a soccer player. I see it as something far more important than just playing soccer 90 minutes every weekend. And it's been hard. I've had to sacrifice many things. I think something that people don't realize is when you are an athlete and you have a voice and you choose to use your voice, you're also very vulnerable, extremely vulnerable to all types of harassment, to losing your playing opportunities, and so much more. I'm gonna stop there and let you continue.
Um, I'm gonna follow up. I'm gonna go with Adrian, and then I'm gonna go to Sara because I want Sara to talk a little bit about working with brands and telling your story. But first, ask Adrian, and as a professor, you're not a professional athlete, but you've told the stories, but you've also advocated for the people who have advocated for us. It is because of Adrian, in large part, that Minnie Minoso is in the Baseball Hall of Fame, because he hit that drum, was in the committee. And I've been in those committees. I've been in the era committee that got Jim Leland in. And I was also in the historical overview committee where you have to get them on the ballot. Advocating for Latino stories, Latinos' place in American history. Adrian, you've done that. How difficult has that been? Because I know it hasn't been easy.
And thank you, Jesus, for the invitation. It's great to be on this panel with fellow Latinas and people who are voices for our community in different ways. As a historian, for me, it's always been important to have a grounding in knowing that we have a story to tell, and that in particular in the telling of history in the United States, that those kinds of stories, we've been present for so long. I'm Boricua, I'm Puerto Rican, but as it comes to like many of our ethnic Mexican brothers and sisters and folk that the border crossed us. It didn't, they've been here before there was a United States of America. And so understanding the importance of providing a Latina, a Latino, Latinx perspective and having their stories being told. That's what I found so powerful when I did connect with the story of Minnie Minoso. Here you have an Afro-Cuban who performed on the same level as all the other baseball greats and somehow was lost to history or lost in translation. And, as someone who, became increasingly bilingual, yo hablo un poquito y no hablo bien, pero, I'm New Yorican that way. But it was so important to allow the athletes to be comfortable to tell their stories in their own voice, to not use judgment about, oh, your English or is not so great, or that because you're so thoughtful and trying to provide an answer in English that somehow you're slower than everybody else. No, it's like tell me in Spanish then. I don't what I want is your voice. What I want to hear is your experience. This is what will educate us. And that was what, that's what our esquina does. That's what we try to do a few years back at La Vida Baseball, is allowing the Latino athlete, spectator, consumer to speak. Because in far too many places in this society, in the US society, it's not allowed to speak and it's not, heard. Um, and to get a little bit at the other question that kind of, where have you gone, Roberto Clemente, is I think we're also at this point in sport history and Latino sport history and Latino sport history. There is a generational shift going on. And yes, we are hungry to have people like Janelly, who's now as an athlete retired, but as a voice still active. We need their voices. We need their being comfortable in expressing themselves. And that, as she noted, that takes a lot of risk. And I'll never forget, I'll finish with this, talking to a Venezuelan player in a major league clubhouse about what was going on in Venezuela and in the US and how they felt about it. And this person told me, I'll talk to you off the record. Please don't put my name on it. I'm a journeyman player, and I can get cut like this if I say the wrong thing or it gets out. And that kind of precarity is so much the story of many Latino athletes in baseball, in soccer, in U.S. development soccer, that if I speak out, I can go because they think I'm trouble, not because they think I have a valid point.
Ooh, Jesus, I think you're on mute.
Sara, thank you very much. Sara, it's so difficult to get brands behind people who are outspoken. You went to the University of Chicago. Adrian, you're at Illinois. We all know the famous Michael Jordan, Republicans buy sneakers, minus. But at Wells Fargo, while you were there, you were able to work with Janelly. Tell us about the projects and how you have found a brand that helps somebody share their voice and help a community.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Where do I start? Maybe picking up the thread of late stage capitalism, right? We're all in it. I'm in it. I was at Wells Fargo, and never did I think I'd enjoy working for a bank, but my focus was on sports. And growing up, so I'm Puerto Rican and Palestinian, hence the kafia. But I grew up in a Mexican neighborhood, and I understood the value of the Mexican community. And so I leave my community, and I just see, Mexicans who are a little more quiet. They're not speaking out. And I was like, what is this? These aren't the Mexicans that I grew up with, right? And then to be at a place at Wells Fargo where they decided to sponsor the Mexican national team. And to me, that was very powerful and purposeful, because it was through sports that fans could be proud of being Mexican in the US stadium. And so I'd worked on that project for years, sponsoring the Mexican national team. And it was very, I'm not Mexican, like I said, but it was very personal for me just based on where I grew up. So through this experience with the Mexican national team, I got to meet Janelly. And this was, I think it was 2019. And beyond, even before 2019, there are certain groups of, a certain segment of the Mexican fan base that chants this word during goal kicks. And being at the brand that sponsors the Mexican national team, it was very uncomfortable. Wells Fargo, based in San Francisco, had a very strong support and care for the LGBT community out in San Francisco and across the country and the world. And so it was this conflict that I was in. I'm sponsoring the Mexican national team, and we've got LGBTQ folks within in the company, outside the company, saying, why is Wells Fargo sponsoring Mexico? And there's this, I felt compelled to not say, we're going to cut off the Mexican national team sponsorship to support one group. We're going to alienate this other one. And so through someone Janelly and I know really well now at TMJ, he's the founder of this women's soccer agency. I said, Guillermo, I really want to address this topic. I want Mexicans to feel supported, but I want the LGBTQ community to feel supported. And with Janelly, we pretty much came up with a campaign called Mexican Pride. And if you guys Google it, if you Google Janelly Mexican Pride and Wells Fargo, you will see this awesome piece of creative and messaging that turned out it was going to be a social media campaign of Janelly talking about what it meant to be Mexican and Mexican pride. And the Mexican national team has in their crest, it was orgullo y pasión, so passion and pride, right? In the US, pride means what we know, a very supportive LGBTQ community. So it started off as a social media campaign, evolved into messaging that we showed in the stadium before and during halftime, and it was such great content. We actually turned it into a TV spot, and Janelly was the face of that campaign for us, and it wound up winning awards. I don't know, Janelly, if you want to add to it. So yes, I'm in this capital system, and I was like, what can I do to support these two communities I personally care about? In the seat that I'm in, which is, you know, super corporate. And I'm just very thankful that I got the support and the budget to make it happen. So yeah, Janelly, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that.
Yeah, Sarah, thanks for that. I would like to add that it was very hard to be the face of that campaign. Very, very hard. We actually filmed the footage in Mexico City, I think it was. And it was hard because of how homophobic Mexico is. I can't even like explain to you the amount of threats and death threats I've received, messages, comments. I've had to like block a lot of certain words on social media to avoid getting those messages. It's content that I don't want my followers to see because it's just, you know, we don't need any more of that. But yeah, I just want to point out it was very hard to be the face of that, but it took a lot of courage. But at the same time, it was something, and it is something that I'm very proud of because I think we're making progress within the Mexican community. We have a long way to go. But campaigns like that are necessary.
You know, when I was a lead sports columnist at St. Louis Post-Dispatch, I would write about white flight when talking about how things affect poor communities. And you get, you know, the Twitter messages like, I hope your 3 daughters are raped, and you get it. But I always felt, and if you talk to anybody in the Baseball Writers Association of America, that if I didn't speak up, I would be letting down Latinos. And I wanted each press box I was in, that in the future, if somebody said something, nobody in that press box could say, what's your problem? Jesus was cool with this. So I was always like the guy who wasn't cool with anything. And I'm from the hood, Janelly. I'm from Linwood and Compton. So like I'm, you know, like, you know, from where you grew up. So I've never been afraid to speak up, but it takes a toll. Can we think of any Latinos right now, Latino athletes, who are speaking up for our in the era of Trump, where, like, you know, I was born to Mexican immigrants, and, you know, like right now the Supreme Court is literally debating birthright citizenship. And if Trump had his way, people like me would not be citizens. And you know, Gooderaw from the Dodgers refused to go to the White Sox, and then pointed that Instagram, you know, my brown house. The Puerto Ricans, Carlos Beltran and Carlos Correa, declined to go in 2018 when Trump, because they saw how Trump's policies affected the Puerto Rican community. Who are some athletes who stand out to you guys who are speaking up? Adrian, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I right now we're such a perilous moment about speaking out. You know, we have Fernando Valenzuela pass away, and then the Dodgers show up at the request of the president at the White House. And I'm like, and it was just before Jackie Robinson Day. And I'm like, you know, this is why many Latinos players and others are very careful right now about speaking up, because they don't feel that team ownership has their back. And if anything, you know, I'm still waiting for the, you know, in academia for a month straight. We kept waiting for another shoe to drop, and we're running out of chancletas, and everything was just, there's nothing left. The closet is empty because everything's been dropped. But I'm still worried about the Latino players and the immigration policy, not just in baseball, but across all professional sports and elite amateur athletics, because FIFA World Cup is coming, the Olympics are coming, or will they come to the United States? So I'm more waiting to hear if some of the players are able to be courageous, not because they're not courageous, but because they feel someone is aligning up with them and they're not alone. Because I think that that's going to be a big thing the next several years, particularly around these very prominent international events.
Sarah,
It's
would
a
you
s-
like to address this?
Yeah, with respect to, current immigration policy or how we're treating undocumented people, it's a struggle. Like, preparing for this chat, I was like, I'm not seeing anything. Like Adrian said, it's like, where, Roberto Clemente, like, where are you? And it's not there. That I found maybe a Canelo Alvarez, the boxer, had something about, maybe it wasn't very forceful, but it was basically saying, look, the Mexicans specifically who come to the U.S. are seeking a better life, and I hope you don't live in fear, and you got to do what's right for you and your family. And that was kind of the most I could find, or the most I've heard, specifically on this topic. When it comes to, that's it, and that's really, I think, what has our communities right now in the most, with the most anxiety, right? Because if we looked at the polls about Latinos in the U.S. leading up to the election, immigration apparently was not at the top. It was more economic stability and can I take care of my family, and that, those types of, the kitchen table things. It wasn't immigration, and now it's that's all we're seeing. But before that, the only other, Janelly for sure, within the Latino population in the U.S. and Mexico around supporting LGBTQ rights. In terms of like very vocal, and it was a couple of years ago, there's a U.S. national team player who's Colombian, Alejandro Bedoya, who during a match, I think it was an MLS match, after another mass shooting, picked up the sideline microphone that picks up the broadcast audio for the broadcast and screamed, Congress, do something now. And that was probably the most bold I've seen anybody, any Latino, in, like, I feel like in recent history, to do that during gameplay, right? He's that. And then I would say, in the women's game, I find that, there's a lot of leaders, especially around women's, autonomy and fighting sexual abuse. Dana Castellanos, who's part of the TMJ family that Janelly also knows, leadership calling out coaches for abuse, right? So we're seeing some, but it's definitely not a huge number, and that's really sad. Understandable, but it's really sad. And the thing is, we have to speak out, because whether we do or we don't, domestic and foreign policy are going to affect us. So no debemos quedar callado. Like, we have to speak up. It doesn't do us anything to stay quiet as a community. But I certainly understand individual needs for sure, and fears to protect ourselves.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
we-
want to add, sorry, now that you mentioned Dana Castellanos, who's a Venezuelan national soccer team player, currently plays at Portland in the NWSL. So she recently got called up to the Venezuelan national team, and she didn't travel for fear of immigration policy. She didn't leave the U.S. because she wasn't sure if she was going to be able to come back in. So it is a concern for Latin athletes in the US. I think it's not really spoken about. I think she might have mentioned something, addressed it like briefly on social media. But I'm curious to see what happens next year. Next year we have the men's World Cup here in the US. So I don't know what's going to happen. Is it, are we going to have male soccer players speak up? I don't know, and I don't think so. I think within what I've seen, at least within soccer, is that for some reason male athletes are less likely to speak up and female athletes are more likely to speak up, and we have much more risk than male athletes, I think.
Yeah, that's Janelly has a great point. And I just took a look at the chat. I saw, I don't know if it's Celso or Kelso, and a really good point. So we're talking about athlete activism, but I've been really impressed in the soccer space, specifically around the fan base, specifically in soccer, in the soccer community. Soccer, there's two groups right now. One is, since this is Vanderbilt in Nashville, the Nashville SC supporter group, La Brigada de Oro, they did not show up to their tailgate, and many did not show up in the stands to protest the ICE kidnappings. I'm going to go ahead and say kidnappings, because of the 50,000 people that are detained in ICE custody, half of them have no criminal records, and we don't have much more information besides that. And so I think when we're talking about, athletes, hopefully they understand the fans will support them. And I think that supporter group in Nashville is a really good example of that. There's another group in women's sports again, called Las Poderosas in LA, that they fight for everything. They're super intersectional, and they're fighting for reproductive rights, immigrant rights, basic humanities. So every time I go there, there's a Palestinian flag being waved. I mean, they care so much about just treating people with dignity. And so it's, I think maybe that could be some comfort to athletes, knowing that the fans would support them, should they choose to speak out.
And I have to say, like, I wonder if leagues like Major League Soccer, where, like folks in Nashville, and I've seen the pictures. I was by God's mercy, I was born in the U.S. But I have tios and tias who have stories about being deported, and I know the pain that the immigrants live, and I wish more Latino athletes would speak up. And like, I think of Roberto Clemente and his friendship with Martin Luther King, with the invitation to Martin Luther King visiting the Clementes in Puerto Rico. And I wonder, like, what Latino athlete would speak up. And I had a friend of mine call me last year and says, "Hey, you have access to all these Venezuelan stars. You should go talk to them and have them speak on how this is affecting their community." I said, "Man, I know these guys well, but I know the answer that I'll get. Like, I can't speak on that, because they feel like I don't know." And I don't know if it's part of the Janelly, you point out, like, the women have more to lose, yet have stronger voices. And does, I started with Roberto Clemente, but, like, Roberto Clemente Jr. literally endorsed Donald Trump. And I'm watching this and I'm thinking, there is no way that Roberto Clemente, the Hall of Famer, would have accepted this. And then you do some digging, and I'm not going to put Roberto Clemente Jr. on blast, but there's a reason people say that he's the black sheep of the family. So we'll just leave it at that. But Luis Clemente right away, like, denounced his own brother. Like, it's like within 6 hours, But Janelly, I really want to see if you could explain just how difficult it was for you to A, come out, and B, then come out to the world. Because
Yeah,
it's one thing to come out to your family, people who love you, and then other people who don't know you to love you.
when I talk about coming out, I like to explain coming out as a constant process. It's a constant thing, and it's done over and over and over again. Why? Because the reality is that society still has this idea of you're either male or you're woman, and they just make assumptions that you're going to be straight. And it's been a constant process, and it was very hard with my family. Even though I was born and raised in California, my home was very Mexican machista home. So I actually I wanted to take my own life at some point because my family didn't love me. My family didn't accept me for being who I am. And I was able to find the courage and the strength to keep moving forward. And then when I was out to public and, social media started growing and I realized, that I'm going to use my platform for visibility and representation, I was like, oh my goodness, this just gets harder and harder. Like I'm not going to only come out once. It's a constant thing. And then because of the way I look, people's ignorance leads them to think that, oh, I'm a straight white woman. That's just what they think. But that's wrong. We should never make assumptions based on the way somebody looks. And it's just a constant thing because I think ignorance and homophobia, it just continues growing. It keeps growing and growing. And, people ask me, well, what can we do to change that? I think in order to get, big changes within society, within cultures, it starts with micro level changes. And that starts with education in the home and what we're teaching, the next generation, where we're teaching, 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds, 10-year-olds. It's going to be a very, very difficult cycle to break, but it is possible. And I think I'm an example of that, right? I never thought I would have the relationship I have with my parents now, but what did that take? Just like it was a coming out process for me, I realized that it was the same for my parents, right? Very Mexican, machista, father and mother, who they simply have always wanted the best for me. I don't think they've ever wanted to hurt me or harm me. But it took me understanding that from a different level of empathy and consciousness and education and awareness that, oh, okay, understanding my culture is key for me to be able to make a difference. And I think I've been able to do that within my family. But how do we do that on a bigger level? How do we do that to change Mexico? We've got a long ways to go.
One thing that I'm very, very proud of is Fernando Valenzuela, who literally took the Mexicans out of the shadows and showed the world that we are. I've lived all over the country, and a lot of people until 1981, and they started seeing Riverfront Stadium in Cincinnati, like packed with Mexicans, and they'd go to Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Houston, obviously Chicago, those are Mexican cities essentially, but people would see like we're everywhere. And I really want to talk about the history of Latino sports activism. The first Mini Miñoso was the Latino Jackie Robinson. He had to integrate teams, like the first Black player for the White Sox. And you have Roberto Clemente, who spoke and demanded to be treated with respect by the racist white members of the Baseball Writers Association of America, of which I was the first Latino to date president. And it's a great pride because you want people to put the ñ on Peña. And if I piss off my sports editor, I'm going to have that fight. And I did. And I'm like, dude, like, like Pena and Peña have complete different meanings. Get it right. But, Roberto Clemente had to fight. Mini Miñoso had to fight to be treated with dignity. The racist Chicago media, the way they would quote him. And, and Adrian, can you tell, as a professor, can you tell the history of Latino sports activism and what it's helped accomplish?
Our community is so diverse, that is among Latinos. We represent so many different backgrounds in terms of gradations of color, of mixtures, from indigenous folk to Afro mixed with indigenous and European. And so, part of activism that I've kind of written about and understood is trying to assert identity that recognize me. And yeah, some of it is indeed like, the ñ matters, the tilde matters, and calling me, or calling someone Jesus and not J, because we can't say Jesus in the English language press. And all the players who had deal with how their names are pronounced and stuff, and fighting for dignity of name, of person, of background was one level. With Minoso, we saw about dealing with multiple realities because of his identity as a Black Latino. And, women athletes face this constantly to this day. The notion that there's a story to be told about Latinas in varsity, college, and professional sports, because we often talk about Title IX, and there was more of, I would say, a drag of a generation in terms of time period as Latinas sought to assert themselves to get the opportunity that everyone else kind of were already beginning to take for granted. And some of that was within our own communities about, Papi, I would like to play football. It's like, oh, no, no puedes. You can't do that. And, I also think about the courage of these athletes, that part of their activism is just being an athlete, to be present on the field, to be present as a leader. I think of Lisa Fernandez, part Boricua, part Cubana, head coach, being excellent player and then transforming that into leadership, and how that really challenges for many people. Felipe Alu, another ejemplo of, going from ball player to manager and presenting for people a representation of leadership that they're not used to, and that everyone needs to see, because it's about what is embodied in many different ways among Latinos. And so I think a lot of Latino sports activism is literally fighting for an opportunity to be on the field, to be in the coaching realm. And ultimately, and how that transforms the playing field, the sport. That's what inspired me to write my second book, Cuban Star, about Alejandro Pompez, another Latino story that kind of got lost in translation, although his presence and impact on the game was transformative. And I think there are many Latino stories of that sort that can be told. Why did it take so long for Tom Flores to get into the Football Hall of Fame? Because too often Latino stories are not centered in a way that people can really understand how profound an impact is really taking place.
I'm gonna say this with great pride, because our Esquina audience, and although we are not Latina centric, I do believe that nobody does more original content on Latinas in the US in English than we do. And there's a story on there today. And Janelly, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong. The NCAA softball tournament has the most superstar Latinas than any other NCAA tournament in America. And we have a story, there's like 45 big time girls. And I go to college, leads A&M in every big time stat. And she was one of my guests on my Latino Excellence podcast. And she plays Volver, Volver as her walk-up song because she wants people to know that it's okay to represent. And Janelly, when I see you embody that. That, like, the next generation, they may not speak English. I mean Spanish, but they represent and they're proud. Like Gabby Garcia, freshman at Oklahoma. Just seeing that last name on the back makes other students go up to them and say, thank you for representing. Sara, sorry for breaking in, but can you follow up on like what we were discussing?
Yeah, I mean, I love that Adrian brought that up because it's huge. And Janelly is retired from playing, but she's now going to be she's a media face, right? She's an analyst on major U.S. media in English. and Janelly in Spanish. So she can do both in two, and that representation is so huge. And it's super meaningful. And Jesus, you brought it up, but I was about to bring up Our Esquina too. You're right. Like these stories they're not enough being told, and they're really, really important. Not just from a feel-good society standpoint, but like this is business, right? One of the reasons Wells Fargo invested in soccer was to reach 65 million plus Latinos in the US that I think has, I don't know, like the eighth, economic or kind of like eighth largest economy in the world. So this stuff is really important. And it's just key in all the positions of leadership that's happening. You mentioned the courage. I'm a co-owner. I am I'm not the only Latina co-owner. There are others, but they're all celebrities, and so to be able to be welcome for who I am without, any star powers, I think says something. And to your point around soccer and Latinas and not soccer, sorry, softball, Canelo Alvarez's agent represents Latina softball players. So, that's somebody who knows talent. Clearly with Canelo Alvarez is also representing, I think Sofia Romero is her name. But anyway, Janelly, I don't know if you were going to say something.
Just I touch on that, the importance of visibility. I think it's huge that her walkout song is Volver, Volver. It's exciting. Just the other day, I went to a Nationals baseball game here in Washington, D.C. I mean, I don't really know anything about men's baseball, like nothing, to be honest. But a few of the players in the Nationals, their walkout songs were like cumbias or Latin music. I got so excited. I got so into the game because I felt like I was being represented out there. And that is huge. That's huge. And we need more of that. I'm sure, when her song comes out, Volver, Volver, like somebody out there in the stands is like, oh man, like it's okay for me to be me. Like it's okay for me to be Mexican in the US. It's okay for me to be Latin in the US or anywhere in the world. And that's part of, I think, why we all do what we do, right? We understand that visibility is necessary for other people to feel heard, to feel identified, because at the end of the day, I think connection with other people is what gives us purpose in this life, and feeling that connection, feeling like we belong. Like you mentioned earlier, Jesus, right? That saves lives.
As part of my Latino Excellence podcast, I always finish it with asking folks to finish this sentence. It is okay for Latinos too. And because some people, we don't know, like I always tell my kids, it's okay to embrace your greatness, because I personally think that we are too humble as a culture. Somebody gives you a compliment and you're raised by a Mexican family, you just put your head down and say, gracias, gracias. No, it's not true. Whereas you see a white person, you tell a white kid, you are so smart. Thank you very much. And they light up. You tell a Mexican kid the same thing. And what do Mexicans do? No. But I tell my kids, it's okay to embrace your greatness. And I have a kid at Yale, I have a kid at Rice, and I have a badass kid who's finishing their sophomore year, because they know that this world allows them to accomplish anything they want. What would you tell people in your shoes, Janelly, athletes? What advice would you give them to have the strength that very few people have? What advice would you give them?
Oh, that's really cool about your kids, by the way. That's impressive. You should be very proud, and you should be very proud. I think, I could say so many different things, but for athletes to know that it's okay to use your voice despite whatever else happens. I think our biggest concern when using our voices, especially within, our culture, the Latin culture, is el qué dirán. We worry about el qué dirán. What are people going to say? What is somebody else going to think about me? So if you can find a way to not give importance to what other people are going to say, you're going to feel so much more freedom and courage and liberty in just being yourself and speaking up. And that's going to go a long way, because I'm a huge fan of John Wooden. And he says who you are as a person is far more important than who you are as a player. I knew a long time ago that I wasn't going to play professional soccer forever, but what I do and what I say as a person can have an impact forever. You're on mute, Jesus.
No te calles otra vez.
Still on mute.
I keep muting myself. I apologize. Let's
Your
go
hands
with,
were talking.
yeah, that's, Adrian and then Sarah. What advice would you give young athletes? What, about finding their voice and being activists?
I think particularly in this moment, I would say it's okay for Latinos to be seen for what they want to be seen. You're going to be seen anyway, it's the thing. And people are going to talk about Latinos, communities, and where we come from. So take your story and tell it, because that's your voice, that's your power, and your presence. Like, as you were saying before, Jesus, about, um, I think sometimes people take humility and being humble, as you say, too far. It's okay to be proud. Even you can be humble and proud, and say thank you, and and talk about the shoulders on who you stand on, because they help lead you to where you are, and they're the support system. I think that's a different way than just well, I don't, not really, because others are brought up to be proud, and sometimes in ways that they shouldn't be proud of. And so, yes, Latino athletes, be proud of where you come from, the shoulders of those you stand upon, because we all have been lifted to the places that we are presently. You know, I'm a I'm the first Latino to be chair of the history department at the University of Illinois. You know, and I know many people came through before and have, but I'm here because my parents loved to push me to be educated, and they wanted me to go beyond what they did, and that's what I also, will encourage our athletes to, like, be proud of what you're doing, and let people know it's okay to be proud.
I like that. I'm gonna take that with me. Humble and proud. They can both exist at the same time. For me, and being on the commercial side of athlete representation at TMJ, and I think one of the reasons why Janelly has, has, even before she retired, she was already sought out for her voice on CBS Media, I think Telemundo, in various places. And so I would say to athletes, show what you're made of, show your character, because that is going to attract the brands that you want to attract, right? And so I think from a commercial standpoint, we are back to capitalism. We are in a capitalist society in the United States. So you know what? Be about something, because that's going to attract somebody who's willing to pay you for it. So that's going to be my advice there.
Well, thank you so much for joining this panel. We have at the most 10 minutes. So I'm going to have everybody give a final parting thought, and we'll go Sara, Janelly, Adrian, and then I'll close it out. And by the way, Janelly, Adrian and I will teach you baseball. We have you covered. You let us know, email us. We got you covered. The history. We're going to have a 34
I'm open to
jersey,
it.
Fernando Valenzuela, and 21 Roberto Clemente, and you're set.
Now let's do it.
Sara.
Yes, I'm excited to be here. I got a little more. I had a feeling I was going to cry on this call anyway, but I am so proud to be here with this group, even to the folks that I didn't have a chance to chat with. I listened to another panel. Looking forward to the next one. Shout out to the chat, especially Tiff Sanchez. I see you. We got some members from the soccer supporters groups here. I would say personally, I'm like so shocked that part of my success in the sports world has been because I have embraced who I am as a Puerto Rican, Palestinian, and a girl from La Vita, which is a Mexican neighborhood in Chicago. Doors have been opened to me as a result. And I would say, back to Adrian's point is like, like be proud of who you are because there's nobody else like you. And you will be very surprised by what opportunities come your way because you are true to yourself. I know it sounds so cheesy, but man, it's true. It's true for me at least. So I'm very, very thankful. And I'm so excited that I get to connect with everybody here. Y gracias.
Janelly?
Yeah, I'm gonna, follow up a bit on what Sara said about, a lot of her success came from embracing who she is. I definitely agree with that. A lot of my success has also come from embracing who I am. And like Adrian said a bit ago, right? People are going to judge you no matter what. They're going to say something about you. They're going to talk about you no matter what, whether it's good or bad. So why not let them talk about who you really are? About your true story. I think I don't like to say that. I think there was an article one time written about me, like said something about like the most fearless soccer player in Mexico or something like that. But I disagree. I don't believe that I'm fearless. I think fear is part of being a voice. I think fear is necessary. I think a lot of people shy away from fear of, XYZ. But I think if you choose to look at it in the right way, I think fear can be used to push you in the right direction. I think if something is scary and you're able to identify why it's scary, maybe that's the route that you need to go. Maybe that means there's something that needs to be changed there. So I would just encourage, people to not let fear stop them from doing whatever it is that they want to do. On the contrary, let, fear push you towards making a difference, towards being that voice, because I think there's always somebody that needs you. There's always somebody that is watching, that is hearing, that is listening. We never know how we can make an impact. And we might not be able to change the entire world, but if we can change one person's world, I think that's all that matters.
Señor, el profe Burgos.
Thank you, Jesus. Janelly, your words reminded me of something I heard. I'm not the originator of this. I heard it on a podcast. It might have even been Trevor Noah's podcast. But they said fear is the first step of courage. And that is, you're like, should I do this? Can I do this? And then you start. Like, you have to go through that fear. You have to face that fear. And I know that's like the challenge so many Latino athletes encounter is about, can I speak up? When do I speak up? How do I speak up? I think for me, part of the path that I've taken, I played high school sports. I played D3 baseball. And as my mom said, the first time I told her I was at the Hall of Fame, she's like, "Oh, I'm glad they let you in because that's the only way you would have gotten in is as a historian." I was doing research, but she's the one who gave me that love of baseball. And the thing about that is understanding that we have different roles and different talents, and we can maximize those things. For me, I wanted to tell the stories of our past because it is always affecting our present as a community. And, the ways in which history is not fully grasped, grappled with, and understood is manifested in where we are today politically on many fronts. And so to me, this is why I reiterate to my students why history is alive and so important. And I would add to that when we talk about Latino activism, that, it is why Latino activism is so important. It's important for our athletes to be just as seen as every other group of athletes and to be heard as much as any other group of athletes. Latino does that work. I endeavor to do that through my scholarship. I appreciate the opportunity to be part of this discussion so that I can meet two other new courageous people who face their fears and move on.
Thank you very, very much. As a soccer person who ended up making his career as a baseball writer and El Tri fan. I posted a picture of me and Brad Davis the other day where I'm somehow wearing a U.S. national team pullover, and he's wearing a sarape after he gave the assist to tie Panama that kept Mexico alive in 2014 World Cup. And we took that picture because Mexico's going to play U.S. once, and he goes, "I bet you're going for El Tri, right?" And then I said, "Well, let me show you my DD-214 to see who's worn the U.S. uniform longest." And for people who don't know, that's the discharge when you get out of the Army. They give you a DD-214. And he's like, "Oh," started calling me Sergeant, and I'll end that like, speak up when people talk trash to you. I say, "Hey, I'm not going to apologize for cheering for a 3. I've put in my time to show my loyalty to the U.S. I have a DD-214 to prove it." And the advice I would give people is like, don't be afraid to stand up for yourself and to speak up. And I'm so grateful for Sara, Janelly, Adrian, and for Andrew Maraniss, one of my dearest friends, for giving me this opportunity. And he's a great author and a great man. Thank you so much for Vanderbilt for this opportunity. Have a blessed day.
Thank you, Jesus. That was a wonderful panel. Thank you to Adrian, Sara, Janelly. That was so enlightening. Thank you for all the work that you're doing, for the words you shared, and for reminding us to have the courage to speak up. It was a very important conversation. We're grateful for your participation. All right,
Thank
and
you,
now,
Andrew.
Thank you.
thank you, Jesus. It was great to see you.
Thank you all. Adios.